An innocent teen gets the death penalty, but the real story hasn't even started. She was silenced, labeled, and locked away. But one phone call changes everything. On the other end of the line is a man with more power than anyone suspects, and more to lose than anyone knows. As secrets start to crack and time runs out, a buried truth begins to rise. What happens when the most powerful man in the country discovers the system got it all wrong? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The winter morning bit at Zaria Wells's cheeks as she pulled her scarf tighter around her neck. Her breath made little clouds in the air as she walked through the narrow alleyway, her backpack heavy with textbooks. She had just finished tutoring at the local library, helping middle schoolers with their math homework. Teaching always filled her with purpose. One day, she whispered to herself, I'll be arguing cases instead of algebra problems. The shortcut behind Jefferson Academy would save her 10 minutes on her walk home to Aunt May's apartment. Zaria checked her watch, just past noon. If she hurried, she could finish her civil rights essay before her evening shift at the grocery store. A sudden noise stopped her mid-step, a thump followed by what sounded like a muffled cry. Zaria froze, listening. There it was again, a groan, coming from behind the dumpsters in the academy's back lot. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small against the brick wall surrounding her. No answer. Common sense told her to keep walking. But what if someone was hurt? Zaria clutched her phone in her pocket and cautiously moved toward the sound. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" As she rounded the corner, her heart jumped into her throat. A young man in a military cadet uniform lay crumpled on the ground, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His eyes fluttered open when her shadow fell across him. "Please," he whispered. Zaria dropped to her knees beside him. "I'm calling for help. Just hold on." Her fingers trembled as she dialed 911, pressing her scarf against the wound with her free hand. The white fabric quickly turned red. "911, what's your emergency?" A calm voice answered. "There's a boy, a cadet, he's bleeding badly," Zaria explained, her voice shaking. "Behind Jefferson Academy, in the back lot. Please hurry." "What's your name, ma'am?" "Zaria Wells, please, he's losing a lot of blood." The operator's voice remained steady. "Emergency services are on their way. Can you tell if he's breathing?" "Yes, but it's shallow. I'm trying to stop the bleeding." The young man, his name tag read Langston, gripped her wrist weakly. "Wasn't your fault," he mumbled. "Save your strength," Zaria urged, pressing harder on the wound. "Help is coming." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Within minutes, flashing lights filled the alley. 2 police officers rushed toward them, hands on their weapons. "Police, don't move," the taller officer shouted. Zaria looked up, relief washing over her. "He needs an ambulance. I found him like this." The officers, Martinez and Reynolds, according to their badges, exchanged glances. Officer Reynolds immediately knelt to check on the cadet, while Martinez approached Zaria. "Step away from him," Martinez ordered, his hand still on his holster. "I was just trying to help," Zaria explained, standing slowly, her hands and coat covered in blood. "I called 911. I found him here." "Put your hands where I can see them," Martinez demanded, his voice hard. Confused, Zaria raised her hands. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Turn around," Martinez ordered, pulling out handcuffs. "What? Why?" Panic rose in her chest. "You're being detained until we figure out what happened here." The cold metal of handcuffs snapped around her wrists as paramedics rushed to Jacob Langston's side. Through a blur of tears, Zaria watched them load him onto a stretcher. "Please," she begged, "check my phone. I called 911. I was trying to save him." Neither officer responded as they led her to the patrol car, reading her rights in monotone voices. Through the window, Zaria could see people gathering, phones raised, recording everything. By nightfall, her face would be all over the news. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small interrogation room. Zaria sat alone at a metal table, her wrists still raw from the handcuffs they'd finally removed. 5 hours had passed since her arrest, and her throat felt dry as sandpaper. Officer Kim paced around the table, his face stern. "Let's go through this again." What were you doing with Cadet Langston? I told you, Zaria said, her voice cracking. I was walking home from tutoring. I heard something and found him already hurt. I called 911 right away. A promising young cadet doesn't just end up stabbed for no reason, Officer Kim said, slapping a folder on the table. Your fingerprints are all over the scene. Because I was trying to help him. Tears welled in Zaria's eyes. Please, I need to call my aunt. She doesn't know where I am. Officer Kim ignored her request. What did you argue about? I didn't even know him. I need a lawyer. Don't I get a phone call? You'll get your call when we're done here. Officer Kim leaned across the table. If you cooperate, things will go easier. I'm trying to tell you what happened. Save the stories, he cut her off. We have witnesses who saw you in the area regularly. Because I tutor at the library, please, my aunt must be worried sick. I just want to... You just want to what? Change your story again? Officer Kim interrupted. Zaria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. Across town, the evening news blared from televisions in homes, bars, and waiting rooms. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Honor student and military cadet Jacob Langston murdered. Local teen in custody. A blonde reporter stood outside Jefferson Academy. Sources tell us Jacob Langston was a model cadet with a bright future ahead of him. The suspect, 18-year-old Zaria Wells, was found at the scene covered in the victim's blood. The station flashed Zaria's yearbook photo next to Jacob's military portrait. At East Side High, reporters swarmed the entrance, thrusting microphones at students and teachers. Did you know Zaria Wells had violent tendencies? One reporter called out to a group of startled teenagers. No comment, a teacher said, ushering the students inside. Please respect their privacy. Social media exploded with hashtags and heated arguments. Comment sections filled with judgment from people who had never met either Zaria or Jacob. The city began to divide along invisible lines. Meanwhile, Lisa Wells clutched her phone, frantically dialing the police station for the 7th time. The news played in the background, showing her niece's face alongside words like murderer and killer. This is Lisa Wells again. I'm Zaria Wells's guardian. Please, I need to speak with her. Ma'am, as we've told you, she's being processed. You'll be notified when you can see her. The call ended before Lisa could protest further. Her hands shook as she turned up the volume on the TV. Prosecutor Alan Merrick stood at a podium, his expression grave. The evidence is overwhelming. We will be charging Zaria Wells with first-degree murder. Given the heinous nature of this crime against a promising young serviceman, we will be seeking the maximum penalty allowed by law. Lisa's knees buckled. The maximum penalty? Death. They wanted to kill her baby girl. No, she whispered, grabbing her purse and car keys. She needed a lawyer. She needed help. She needed someone to listen before it was too late. As she rushed out the door, the news showed Zaria being led in an orange jumpsuit toward a courthouse, cameras flashing in her terrified face. General Alexander Beckett stepped off the military transport plane at Andrews Air Force Base, straightening his uniform jacket as the cool morning air hit his face. After 2 weeks of diplomatic meetings across Europe, he was exhausted but satisfied with the progress made with NATO allies. Welcome back, sir. His aide, Captain Rodriguez, greeted him with a crisp salute. Your car is waiting. There's been a situation at Jefferson Academy that requires your attention. Beckett nodded, sliding into the back seat of the black SUV. Brief me. Captain Rodriguez handed him a tablet. A cadet was murdered 3 days ago, sir. Jacob Langston, top of his class. Beckett's eyes narrowed as he swiped through the news reports. The screen showed footage of a young woman being led away in handcuffs, her face partially hidden by her hair. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. Tragic, Beckett said, focusing instead on the photo of Cadet Langston in his dress uniform. He had promise. Yes, sir. The Pentagon press office needs your approval on a statement. The media coverage has been intense. The car pulled into the Pentagon parking lot, and Beckett was immediately swept into a flurry of meetings. By afternoon, he sat at the head of a conference table as his staff presented updates. The Academy's reputation is at stake, sir, Colonel Winters explained, sliding a folder across the table. Enrollment applications could drop by 20% if we don't handle this correctly. And the prosecution? Beckett asked. Moving quickly. The girl was caught at the scene. Prosecutor Merrick is confident. Beckett scanned the press statement drafted for his approval. It expressed condolences to the Langston family and emphasized the Academy's commitment to justice. The final paragraph, sir, Captain Rodriguez pointed out. We're backing the prosecutor's call for swift and severe punishment. Without hesitation, Beckett signed the bottom of the page. Send it out immediately. The Academy's reputation must be protected. None of his aides mentioned the name of the accused. None of them knew it mattered. The courtroom was packed with reporters and cameras when Zaria was let in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her thin frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually neat braids were coming undone. Lisa Wells sat in the front row, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beside her sat a harried-looking legal aid attorney who had been assigned to Zaria's case just hours earlier. We should request a continuance, the attorney whispered. I haven't had time to review all the evidence. Will they give us more time? Lisa asked desperately. The attorney's hesitation was answer enough. Judge Harris entered, and the room fell silent. His face was a mask of stern indifference as he called the court to order. Prosecutor Merrick rose, confidence radiating from his expensive suit. Your Honor, the defendant stands accused of a heinous crime against a promising young cadet. We request remand without bail. When Zaria's attorney stood to argue, Judge Harris barely looked at him. Given the severity of the charges and the risk to public safety, bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. Lisa gasped, reaching toward her niece. Zaria turned, her eyes scanning the packed courtroom. For a moment, her gaze hardened into a glare, not of anger, but of determination. She would not be broken by this. As the bailiff led Zaria away, Lisa rushed to the legal aid attorney. They can't do this. She's innocent. Mrs. Wells, he said quietly, I'll do what I can, but you need to understand. This case seems predetermined. From the back of the courtroom, reporters rushed out to broadcast the news. No bail for the cadet killer. 25 years earlier, the air hung heavy with humidity in the small West African village. Medical tents dotted the clearing where both military personnel and humanitarian workers tended to locals affected by the recent civil unrest. Captain Alexander Beckett wiped sweat from his brow as he coordinated security for the mission. Captain, we need more antibiotics at Tent 3, called a voice that had become increasingly familiar over the past month. Monica Wells approached, her dark skin glistening in the afternoon sun. Her medical scrubs were stained with the day's work, but her smile remained bright despite the exhaustion in her eyes. I'll have my men escort the next supply run, Beckett replied, his professional tone softening slightly. How are you holding up, Nurse Wells? I've told you before, it's Monica, she said, her smile widening, and I'm better now. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. What had begun as professional courtesy had grown into something neither had expected. In the weeks that followed, they found moments together, brief escapes from the chaos around them, walks at sunset, hushed conversations under starlight, and eventually, passionate nights in Monica's small quarters. I've never met anyone like you, Beckett had whispered one night, his usual military discipline momentarily forgotten in her arms. Is that a good thing, Captain? She teased. The best thing. But their bubble couldn't last forever. 3 weeks before the mission's end, Monica found Beckett reviewing maps in the command tent. Alexander, can we talk, privately? Her serious tone made him straighten. They stepped outside, walking to a quiet spot behind the supply containers. I'm pregnant, Monica said simply, her hand instinctively touching her stomach. Beckett's face froze. The warmth that had characterized their relationship vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, distant expression she had never seen before. That's not possible, he said, though they both knew it was. It is. And it's happening, Monica replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Beckett stiffened, his posture reverting to military rigidity. "I can't be involved in this, Monica. My career, my position, duty comes first. It has to." "Duty?" Monica repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "I'm being considered for advancement. A family, especially under these circumstances, isn't compatible with my path." His words came out rehearsed, as if he'd prepared for this moment. Monica nodded slowly, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I understand completely, Captain Beckett. I'll raise this child alone. And don't worry, I won't contact you again." She kept her promise. 18 years later, Lisa Wells sat on her living room floor surrounded by boxes. It had been 3 years since Monica's death from cancer, and Lisa had finally found the courage to sort through her sister's personal belongings. At the bottom of a weathered shoebox, she found a sealed envelope. The front simply read, "For Zaria, when she needs it most." Curiosity getting the better of her, Lisa carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line: "If life ever gets too heavy and no one listens, call him." Below was a phone number with the name A. Beckett written beside it. Lisa's hand trembled as she realized what, or rather who, this meant. Monica had never revealed Zaria's father's identity, taking the secret to her grave. But here it was, preserved all these years. She folded the note carefully, wondering if the time had come to share this final gift from mother to daughter. The cold fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallway flickered as the bailiff led Zaria back toward the holding area. The judge's words still echoed in her ears. "Appeal denied. Execution date is set for 90 days from today." Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk with her head high, even as photographers snapped pictures for tomorrow's headlines. Later that night, a guard unlocked the door to her new cell on death row. The space was smaller than her previous cell, just a metal bed, toilet, and small desk bolted to the floor. "You get 1 hour of yard time daily," the guard said flatly. "Commissary privileges remain the same. Lights out at 10. The door clanged shut behind him. Zaria stood motionless in the center of the cell, her breath coming in short gasps. 90 days. Just 90 days left to live for a crime she didn't commit. When morning came, Zaria requested paper and envelopes. If the system wouldn't listen, maybe someone else would. She wrote letter after letter, to the governor, to civil rights organizations, to law professors at nearby universities, even to celebrities known for advocacy work. Her hand cramped as she detailed her story, pleading for someone, anyone, to look at the evidence that had been ignored. "I was trying to save him," she wrote in each one. "I didn't kill Jacob Langston." Days turned into weeks. The mailbag came and went, but no responses arrived for Zaria. Each morning, she would look up hopefully when the guard passed by with mail. Each morning, he would walk past her cell without stopping. By the 3rd week, her hope began to fade. Sitting on her bed one night, Zaria thought of her mother, how Monica had always told her to keep faith even when things seemed impossible. She remembered her Aunt Lisa's visit just before she was moved to death row. "Your mother left this for you," Lisa had whispered, sliding an envelope through the visitor's window. "She said to open it when life got too heavy, and no one would listen." With trembling fingers, Zaria retrieved the envelope from beneath her thin mattress. Inside was a single note with her mother's handwriting. "If life ever gets too heavy, and no one listens, call him." Below was a phone number with the name A. Beckett. During her next phone privilege, Zaria dialed the number, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the ringing. After 3 rings, a man answered. "General Beckett speaking." His voice was crisp, authoritative, the voice of someone accustomed to command. Zaria's throat tightened. She'd rehearsed what to say, but now words failed her. Finally, she managed to speak. "This is Zaria Wells," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, gathering courage, she continued more firmly. "I think you're my father, and I'm about to die for something I didn't do." Silence hung on the line, stretching so long Zaria thought he might have hung up. The phone trembled in General Alexander Beckett's hand. The voice on the other end, young, desperate, yet oddly composed, sent a chill through his body that he hadn't felt since combat. "I think you're my father, and I'm about to die for something I didn't do." Beckett froze at his desk, his face draining of color. Captain Loring, his aide, had been briefing him on the day's schedule but stopped mid-sentence when he noticed the general's expression. "Sir, is everything all right?" Captain Loring asked, concern evident in his voice. Beckett didn't respond immediately. His mind raced back 20 years to a field hospital in West Africa, to a woman with kind eyes and a gentle laugh. Monica Wells, a name he had buried deep in his memory, along with the guilt. "Wells," he whispered, almost to himself. Then, composing himself with military precision, he addressed his aide. "Captain, I need you to get me everything on an inmate named Zaria Wells. Priority level Alpha." "The cadet murder case, sir?" Captain Loring looked confused. "That's not typically under our jurisdiction." "Everything, Captain, now." Beckett's tone left no room for questions. When Loring left, Beckett sat alone, staring at the phone. Monica's daughter. His daughter? It couldn't be coincidence. The timing aligned perfectly with their brief relationship. Within hours, Beckett had ordered a discreet DNA test. He provided his sample and arranged for one to be collected from Zaria, under the guise of standard prison medical procedures. The strings he pulled were numerous, but his position afforded him certain privileges. The following day, Beckett drove himself to a small medical practice outside Arlington. Dr. James Ingram had served with him years ago as a military physician before returning to civilian practice. More importantly, he had been stationed at the same humanitarian mission as Monica. "I need to ask you about someone," Beckett said after they'd exchanged brief pleasantries in Ingram's office. "Monica Wells." Dr. Ingram's eyebrows rose. "Monica? That's a name I haven't heard in years. She passed away about 5 years ago." "Cancer." Beckett's jaw tightened. "Did she have a child?" "Yes, a daughter." Ingram studied Beckett's face carefully. "Brilliant girl, honors student. She was planning to study law last I heard." He paused. "She looks just like Monica. Same determined spirit, same intelligent eyes." "And the father?" Beckett asked, his voice unnaturally steady. Monica never said much about him. Military man who couldn't or wouldn't be part of their lives. In the days that followed, Beckett found himself obsessively watching footage of Zaria's trial. He requested every recording, every transcript. Late at night, alone in his study, he would rewind and replay her testimony, studying her face, her mannerisms. It was her eyes that finally broke through his carefully constructed walls. Monica's eyes, intelligent, compassionate, unflinching even in the face of injustice. The resemblance hit him like a physical blow. As doubt grew within him, so did a feeling he had long suppressed: responsibility. Not the kind that came with his rank and position, but something more primal. The DNA test results weren't back yet, but Beckett already knew the truth. This young woman facing execution was his daughter, and for the first time in decades, duty to country and duty to family were in direct conflict. The envelope sat on General Beckett's desk like a ticking bomb, his name printed in clinical font, the Pentagon seal stamped in the corner. He had ordered it delivered before office hours, before the hallways filled with staff and questions. Now, alone in the first light of morning, he slid his finger beneath the flap and removed the single sheet of paper. The DNA results were unambiguous: 99.9998% probability of paternity. Beckett's hand trembled as he held the paper. The military precision that had guided his life for decades suddenly abandoned him. The black and white confirmation of what he already knew in his heart struck him with unexpected force. "Zaria Wells is my daughter," he whispered to the empty room. He set the paper down and covered his face with his hands. The weight of this truth pressed against his chest, making it difficult to breathe. His daughter, his flesh and blood, sat in a prison cell, counting down the days until her execution, for a crime he was increasingly convinced she didn't commit. His mind drifted back 20 years to a dusty field hospital in West Africa. Monica's face appeared before him, as vivid as if she were standing in the room, her dark eyes full of both love and disappointment. "Stay," she had whispered, holding his hand between both of hers. "We could make it work, Alexander." The memory cut through him like a blade. Her belly had just begun to show the first signs of pregnancy, their child, Zaria, growing inside her. "My duty is to my country, Monica," he had replied, gently pulling his hand away. "I can't be the man you need me to be, the father this child deserves." "So duty comes first," she had said, her voice soft but strong. "Always." He had nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Always." A knock at the door jolted Beckett back to the present. Captain Loring entered with the morning briefing folder. "Sir, you're here early," Loring said, then noticed the paper on Beckett's desk. "The test results?" "It's confirmed," Beckett said, his voice steadier than he felt. "She's my daughter." Loring closed the door behind him. "General, I need to advise caution. This information could have serious implications for your position if it becomes public. The Joint Chiefs—" "I'm aware of the ramifications, Captain," Beckett cut him off. "Sir, perhaps we should consult with legal counsel before proceeding." Beckett shook his head. "Number, this stays between us for now. If word gets out that I'm personally involved, any investigation could be compromised." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Pentagon courtyard below. "Contact Colonel Harper. Have her report to me directly this afternoon." "Harper? From intelligence?" "She's thorough and discreet. I want her to review the original crime scene evidence, interview reports, everything from the Langston murder case. Tell her to look for inconsistencies, anything that doesn't add up." "Yes, sir," Loring replied, hesitating at the door. "General, if I may, this path you're taking is dangerous." Beckett turned, his face set with determination. "My daughter is innocent, Captain, and I've failed her for 18 years. I won't fail her now." Colonel Harper sat alone in a dimly lit office at the Pentagon, her desk covered with stacks of papers. She'd been reviewing the trial transcripts for hours, and something wasn't adding up. Her trained eyes narrowed as she flipped through the witness statements, noting peculiar patterns of redacted information. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, circling another blacked-out paragraph with her red pen. The witness list was suspiciously short, carefully selected to support the prosecution's narrative. But one name caught her attention: Noah Dre. He appeared in the initial police report as present at the scene, yet was never called to testify. A quick search revealed he was a cadet with autism who had been near the academy lot when Jacob Langston was killed. Harper jotted down his name and address. Why would they ignore a potential eyewitness? In her prison cell, Zaria sat cross-legged on her thin mattress, a blank sheet of paper before her. The execution date loomed just weeks away, and she needed to put her affairs in order, what little she had. "Are you sure about this, child?" asked Chaplain Rivera, her kind eyes watching as Zaria's pen hovered over the paper. "I'm sure," Zaria said softly. "I don't have much to leave behind." She began to write her final wishes in careful, measured strokes. Her journal should go to Aunt Lisa. It contained everything she truly was, not the monster portrayed in court. No flowers at her funeral. They seemed pointless now. Instead, she requested only that someone somewhere record that she died innocent. "They took my life," she told the chaplain, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I won't let them take my truth, too." The Dre family lived in a modest suburban home outside the city. Colonel Harper, dressed in civilian clothes, knocked on their door late that evening. "Mr. and Mrs. Dre?" she asked when the door opened. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to speak with your son about a case I'm reviewing." Noah's parents were protective, immediately suspicious of this stranger asking about their son. "Noah doesn't do well with strangers," his father explained. "The police already tried talking to him after that cadet was killed. He got too anxious." "Please," Harper pressed, "it's important. A young woman's life depends on it." From behind his parents, a tall, thin young man with careful eyes appeared. "Who's she?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. "I'm Colonel Harper," she answered, speaking directly to Noah. "I'm looking into what happened to Jacob Langston." Noah retreated slightly but didn't leave. Harper slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew a photo of Zaria. "Do you recognize her?" she asked. Noah stepped forward, studying the picture. "She tried to help Jacob. She didn't hurt him." His parents exchanged worried glances as Harper continued gently. "Noah, did you see what happened that day?" Noah nodded, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his leg. "I was watching birds behind the storage shed. I saw a man push Jacob. He had a silver academy ring." Harper felt her pulse quicken. "A silver ring? Can you describe the man?" "Tall. Angry. He said Jacob took something from him." Noah's eyes remained fixed on Zaria's photo. "Not her. She came after." Harper knew immediately who it might be. Troy Hanley, Jacob's rival who had been jealous of Jacob's relationship with Zaria. The pieces were starting to fit together. "Noah," she said carefully, "would you be willing to tell this to others? To help her?" Noah looked at his parents, then back at Harper. "She tried to help Jacob. I'll help her." General Alexander Beckett sat alone in his secure office, the glow of a video screen casting shadows across his tired face. The footage showed Noah Dre speaking hesitantly, but clearly to Colonel Harper. The boy's hands moved constantly, but his eyes remained steady as he described what he'd seen that fateful day. "I was watching a red-tailed hawk," Noah explained. "Then I heard shouting. The tall cadet, the one with the silver ring. He pushed Jacob hard. Jacob fell and hit his head. There was blood." Beckett paused the video, his finger hovering over the screen where Noah pointed to the academy ring. The same ring Beckett himself had worn decades ago. The same ring Troy Hanley now wore. "He was angry about the girl," Noah continued when Beckett resumed the video. "Said Jacob should stay away from her." Beckett's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about a random killing. This was about Zaria, his daughter. The daughter he'd never acknowledged. The daughter now sentenced to death for a crime she didn't commit. He buried his face in his hands. For decades, he'd made decisions that protected the military's image above all else. Now, those same decisions had created a system that was about to execute his own flesh and blood. The prison visiting room was cold and sterile. Lisa Wells sat rigidly in the hard plastic chair, watching as guards led Zaria in. Her niece looked thinner, her eyes hollow, but there was still that quiet dignity Lisa had always admired. "Aunt Lisa," Zaria whispered as they embraced across the table. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I'll always come back," Lisa said, holding Zaria's hands tightly. "I'm fighting for you every single day." Zaria glanced around, then leaned forward. "I did something. I found a number Mom left me before she died." Lisa's breath caught. "Your mother's letter?" "Yes." Zaria's voice trembled slightly. "I called him, Aunt Lisa. I called my father." Lisa's eyes widened. She'd known about Monica's past relationship with a military man, but Monica had taken most details to her grave. Did he answer?" Lisa asked carefully. "Yes." Zaria's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if he believes me, but he listened. That's more than anyone else has done." Lisa squeezed Zaria's hands tighter, fighting back her own tears. "Your mother would be proud of your courage, and I'm not giving up hope. Not now. Not ever." They embraced again, both women silently acknowledging the ticking clock hanging over them. Colonel Harper stood at attention in Beckett's office, a thick file in her hands. "Sir, there's more," she said, placing the file on his desk. "Troy Hanley has a history. 2 years ago, he was accused of harassing a female cadet. The case was buried." Beckett opened the file with dread. There it was, his own signature on the recommendation to handle the matter internally to avoid negative publicity for the academy. "I remember this," he said quietly. "I was told it was just a misunderstanding between cadets." "It wasn't, sir," Harper replied firmly. "The female cadet was reassigned. Hanley remained with a clean record. And now Jacob Langston is dead. and your daughter is taking the blame." The word daughter hung in the air between them. Beckett looked up sharply. "You know?" "I figured it out, sir," Harper said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Beckett stared at his signature on the document that had helped create a monster in Troy Hanley. His decisions had led to this moment, his daughter facing execution while the real killer walked free. General Beckett stared at the file in his hands, the weight of his own signature crushing him like a physical burden. His daughter was going to die because of a system he had helped build, a system that protected the wrong people for the wrong reasons. "I've made a terrible mistake," he said quietly, more to himself than to Colonel Harper. "Many mistakes." Harper stood silently, allowing the general this moment of painful clarity. Beckett straightened his shoulders and reached for a secure phone line. "Get me Captain Reynolds from Special Operations, immediately." Within minutes, Beckett was signing a classified directive. The document authorized the immediate detention of Cadet Troy Hanley for questioning related to a fabricated national security breach. It wasn't entirely legal, but it would buy them time. "Sir, this is risky," Harper warned. "My daughter has 62 days to live for a crime she didn't commit," Beckett replied, his voice like steel. "I'll risk everything." The next morning, Beckett sat at the head of a conference table in a secure Pentagon room. His legal team had spent the night combing through Troy Hanley's records. "His file has been sanitized, sir," Major Chen explained, spreading documents across the table. 3 separate incidents expunged. Not just the harassment case, there was a drunk driving incident and an assault complaint that disappeared too. "Who has the authority to do this?" Beckett demanded. "Only someone at the highest level, sir." Beckett's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who that someone was. General Rawlings entered the room, his face a mask of professional courtesy. He'd been Beckett's chief of staff for 7 years. "You wanted to see me, Alex?" Beckett dismissed everyone else from the room with a nod. When the door closed, he slid Hanley's doctored file across the table. "Why did you clean this cadet's record, James?" Rawlings didn't even glance at the file. "His father is Senator Hanley. The family has donated millions to the academy." "And that justifies covering up multiple offenses?" Beckett's voice remained dangerously calm. "It's how things work. You know that." Rawlings frowned. "Why the sudden interest in this cadet?" "Because an innocent woman is going to be executed while this protected cadet walks free after committing murder." Rawlings paled slightly. "You can't prove that." "I'm going to..." Beckett leaned forward. "Did you know the woman on death row is my daughter?" The shock on Rawlings's face was answer enough. In her prison cell, Zaria sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, writing in the journal the chaplain had given her. She'd begun organizing her final thoughts, making peace with a fate she couldn't escape. "What are you writing?" asked Dana, the young woman in the cell across from hers. "Letters to people I'll never see again," Zaria replied. "Instructions for my aunt. Things I want people to know after I'm gone." Dana gripped the bars of her cell. "You ain't gone yet." 59 days, Zaria said softly. "That's all I have left. My grandma used to say even when no one listens, sometimes the storm breaks in your favor," Dana said. "Don't give up, Zaria." Zaria closed her journal, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I'm trying to be realistic." "Being realistic don't mean giving up hope," Dana insisted. "Something could still change." Zaria nodded, but her eyes remained distant. She was learning to make peace with death, a lesson no 18-year-old should have to learn. The summer heat pressed down on Washington, D.C. like a heavy blanket, but the young woman standing on the steps of Howard University seemed untouched by it. Monica Wells, just 19, stood tall with her chin lifted, addressing the crowd of students and community members gathered before her. "We cannot wait for justice to be handed to us," she called out, her voice carrying across the humid air. "We must demand it." Alexander Beckett, 21 and stiff in his civilian clothes, stood at the edge of the crowd. He was supposed to be enjoying his brief leave from military school, not attending protests. Yet something about this young woman's voice had drawn him here after overhearing talk about the demonstration. They tell us to be patient, Monica continued, fire in her eyes and conviction in her voice. But how long must we wait for equal treatment under the law? How long must we wait to be seen as human beings? The crowd responded with cheers and raised fists. Beckett found himself mesmerized. He had been raised to respect order and authority, but this woman's words made him question things he had never thought to question before. When the speech ended and the crowd began to disperse, Beckett found himself walking toward her instead of away. "That was powerful," he said awkwardly when he reached her. Monica looked him up and down, noting his military straight posture. "Thank you," she replied cautiously. "Are you here to support the cause or just observe?" "I'm not sure yet," he answered honestly, "but I'd like to learn more." 6 weeks later, under the starlit sky of a West African village, Monica laughed as she splashed water at Beckett from the edge of a small stream. They had both volunteered for a peacekeeping mission. She as a medical aide, he as part of his military training. "I still can't believe you showed up here," she said, her smile bright in the moonlight. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said that day," Beckett admitted, moving closer to her. "About making a difference." Monica's eyes softened. "And now? Do you still want to make a difference?" "I do," he said, "but our methods are different." "They don't have to be," she insisted, taking his hand. "You can change things from the inside. Rise through the ranks. Make the system better." "And you'll change things from the outside," he said, pulling her close. "Between the two of us, we could move mountains." "Promise me," she whispered against his lips. "Promise me we'll find a way to make both our dreams work." "I promise," he said, meaning it with all his heart in that moment. But promises made under African stars proved harder to keep in the cold light of reality. Their paths diverged, his deeper into military service, hers into humanitarian work. What had seemed possible in the magic of that summer faded under the weight of duty and distance. General Alexander Beckett stood before the mirror in his Pentagon office, straightening his uniform one last time. 63 medals and ribbons adorned his chest, symbols of a lifetime of service and sacrifice. The face that looked back at him was lined with age and responsibility, so different from the young man who had fallen in love with a fiery activist all those years ago. "You gave me a second chance, Monica," he said aloud to the empty room, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't waste it." He knew what he had to do. Going public with the evidence of corruption and cover-ups would mean the end of his career. 4 decades of service would end in disgrace, but his daughter's life hung in the balance, and this time, he would not choose duty over family. Beckett picked up his hat and squared his shoulders. The press conference was scheduled for noon. There would be no turning back. At precisely noon, the Pentagon press room buzzed with confusion. Reporters scrambled to their seats as General Alexander Beckett strode to the podium, flanked not by his usual aides, but by Colonel Harper. The impromptu press conference had been called with only 30 minutes' notice, sending Washington's media into a frenzy of speculation. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Beckett began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The cameras flashed, capturing his grim expression. "I stand before you today not as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but as a father." A murmur rippled through the room. Beckett's personal life had always been a closed book. 18 years ago, I made a choice that I have regretted every day since. I abandoned a woman I loved and the child she carried, my child. His voice caught slightly. That child is Zaria Wells, who currently sits on death row for a murder she did not commit. The room erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions. Beckett raised his hand for silence. "The justice system has failed my daughter. Through a Pentagon investigation, we have uncovered evidence pointing to Cadet Troy Hanley as the actual perpetrator in the death of Jacob Langston." He gestured to the screen behind him, where security footage appeared showing Troy arguing with Jacob near the academy grounds. This footage was deliberately withheld from the trial. We have also located a witness, Noah Dre, who saw Hanley at the scene. In the Attorney General's office, phones began ringing off the hook as Beckett continued. "I am formally requesting that the Department of Justice open a federal investigation into this case. the prosecutorial misconduct, and the institutional cover-up that followed. The Attorney General watched the broadcast, stunned, before picking up her phone to make an immediate call to her staff. Meanwhile, across town, Troy Hanley stared at his television in horror. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. His father wasn't answering. No one was answering. Furthermore, Beckett continued, his voice growing stronger, I take personal responsibility for the culture of silence that allowed this miscarriage of justice. In protecting the reputation of our institutions, we have betrayed the very values we claim to uphold. In her death row cell, Zaria sat cross-legged on her bed, barely paying attention to the small TV mounted high on the wall. The news had become background noise to her. Another day, another story that had nothing to do with her truth. Then she heard her name. Her head snapped up just as the camera zoomed in on General Beckett's face. Zaria Wells is my daughter, he repeated firmly, and I will not stand by while an innocent young woman, my flesh and blood, pays the price for our collective failure. Zaria's legs gave out beneath her. She stumbled toward the bars, gripping them to keep from falling completely. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the man on the screen, her father, fighting for her life. He believes me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Someone finally believes me. The prison chaplain appeared in the corridor, having rushed to her cell after hearing the news. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder through the bars. God works in mysterious ways, child, he said softly as Zaria sobbed with relief. Within 24 hours of General Beckett's press conference, the media storm had grown into a national hurricane. News vans crowded the Pentagon perimeter. Reporters shouted questions at anyone in uniform, and social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice for Zaria. In the Pentagon briefing room, Beckett's aide Captain Loring flipped through channels on the monitor. Every major network was covering the story. The general's confession has raised serious questions about military transparency, said one anchor, her expression grave. Another channel showed a heated debate. He betrayed his oath to protect the institution, argued a retired colonel. No, he honored a higher oath, to protect justice and truth, countered a civil rights attorney. Captain Loring sighed and turned to Beckett, who stood watching with his arms crossed. Sir, the Secretary of Defense is requesting an immediate meeting. Beckett nodded. Tell him I'll be there shortly. Meanwhile, across the country, local news stations had begun airing footage from Zaria's past. Clips of her tutoring children at the community center, receiving academic awards, speaking at her high school graduation as valedictorian. This is the young woman facing execution, a sympathetic reporter explained. A straight-A student with no prior record, who volunteered 20 hours a week while maintaining a full scholarship. Public opinion was shifting rapidly. Social media campaigns demanding her release gained thousands of followers by the hour. Across town, Colonel Harper supervised as military police escorted Troy Hanley into custody. The young cadet's face was a mask of contempt as he was fingerprinted and processed. I have nothing to say, he repeated when questioned, requesting a lawyer. Later that evening, Harper led a team to search Hanley's dormitory. Under a loose floorboard beneath his bed, they discovered a leather-bound journal. Harper flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Sir, he called to his assistant, you need to see this. The journal contained detailed entries about Jacob Langston. One page read, Jacob thinks he can take what's mine. First my spot on the leadership team, then Zaria's attention. He doesn't deserve either. Another entry, dated the day before the murder, was more disturbing. If I can't have what's mine, no one will. Sometimes problems require permanent solutions. Harper carefully bagged the journal. Get this to the general immediately. That same night, Alexander Beckett stood on Lisa Wells's modest porch, his heart pounding harder than it had in any combat situation. When she opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed but fierce. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, she said, but stepped aside to let him in. In her small living room, surrounded by photos of Zaria growing up, all the moments he'd missed, Beckett felt the full weight of his failure. Monica would be ashamed of what you did, Lisa said, her voice breaking. And even more ashamed of what you didn't do. Beckett nodded, accepting every word. I know. Nothing I say can change the past. You abandoned her before she was born, Lisa said, tears streaming down her face. Don't you dare abandon her now. I won't, Beckett promised, his voice steady with resolve. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Not just for my conscience, but for her. For Zaria. Lisa studied his face, searching for sincerity. She has your stubbornness, she finally said, and Monica's heart. That night, Alexander Beckett tossed in his bed, sheets tangled around him like restraints. His dreams carried him to a place he hadn't visited in decades. Monica Wells sat beneath a sprawling oak tree, sunlight filtering through leaves to dance across her face. She wore a simple yellow dress, the same one she'd worn when they'd last spoken. Her eyes held no anger, only a profound sadness. You could have been there, she said softly, for both of us. Beckett tried to speak, but his dream self had no voice. Monica smiled, that gentle smile he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. It's not too late for her, Monica whispered. Even if it's too late for us. Beckett woke with a gasp, his nightshirt damp with sweat. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Sleep wouldn't return now. He knew that much from years of battlefield nightmares. He pulled on a robe and walked outside to his balcony. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black canvas like distant beacons. In all his years of military service, he'd looked to the stars for navigation, for timing operations, for comfort in foreign lands. Now he looked up and whispered, "Help me save her, Monica. I don't know if I can do this alone." The stars offered no answer, but somehow the weight on his chest felt slightly lighter. In the sterile visitation room of the prison, Zaria sat across from Dana, separated by a scratched plastic divider. Dana was barely 20, serving 15 years for a robbery gone wrong. My lawyer says people are talking about your case everywhere, Dana said, her eyes bright with excitement. Your dad's really shaking things up. Zaria still struggled with the word dad. It felt foreign on her tongue. It doesn't feel real. Any of it. Dana nodded, tracing invisible patterns on the table. You know, my mom never even showed up for my trial. Said she couldn't bear to see me in chains. Her voice cracked slightly. At least yours is fighting for you, even if he's late to the game. Zaria reached forward, placing her palm against the divider. Dana matched the gesture on the other side. If you get out, when you get out, Dana corrected herself. Don't forget about the rest of us in here. I won't, Zaria promised. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond these walls. The feeling was terrifying and beautiful all at once. Attorney General Walton's office was impeccably decorated with law books and framed constitutional amendments. The man himself looked uncomfortable as Beckett sat across from him. General, I understand your personal stake in this, but your public confession has turned this into a media circus, Walton said, straightening papers that were already perfectly aligned. Then let it be a circus, Beckett replied, his voice steady. Just don't let it be a grave. Walton sighed heavily. The evidence you've presented is compelling, I'll grant you that. But reopening a case after such a public spectacle sets a dangerous precedent. More dangerous than executing an innocent woman? Beckett leaned forward. More dangerous than allowing a murderer to walk free because we're afraid of embarrassment? There are protocols. I've followed protocols my entire life, Beckett interrupted. I've upheld systems and institutions at great personal cost, but this time the system is wrong, and you know it. Walton studied Beckett's face. You realize this could end your career? My career ended the moment I chose it over my daughter, Beckett said. Now I'm just trying to make sure she has one. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Chaplain Ross entered Zaria's cell. His face was solemn, his hands clutching a manila envelope. Zaria knew what it contained before he even spoke. I'm sorry, Zaria, he said, his voice gentle. The warden asked me to deliver this to you. Zaria took the envelope, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a clinical timeline of her final 72 hours. The document outlined everything with cold precision. Her last meal, final visitation rites, the procedure for spiritual counseling, and the exact time she would be escorted to the execution chamber. "This can't be happening," she whispered, the paper shaking in her hands. "I didn't kill anyone." Chaplain Ross sat beside her on the narrow cot. "I know," he said simply, "and I believe you." Zaria traced her finger over the final line on the page. Time of scheduled execution, 12:01 a.m. Her death had a timestamp now, as ordinary as a dinner reservation. Outside the county courthouse, the crowd had swelled to hundreds. People carried hand-painted signs reading, "Justice for Zaria" and "Black Lives Matter." The chants grew louder as Lisa Wells approached the makeshift podium. "My niece has been locked away for a crime she didn't commit," Lisa's voice rang out, amplified by both microphone and righteous anger. "We don't need sympathy. We need justice." The crowd roared in response. Among them stood college students, community organizers, and families with children hoisted on shoulders. One young woman held up a laminated page from Zaria's journal, reading aloud, "I still believe in truth, even when the world doesn't believe in me." Similar readings were happening across the country. Zaria's words, once private reflections, had become rallying cries. Her story had touched something deep in the national consciousness, a recognition of how easily justice could be perverted when filtered through prejudice. In a quiet corner of a Washington, D.C. coffee shop, Alexander Beckett sat across from a man with the same military bearing as himself. General Matthew Langston, now retired, looked older than his years, grief having carved deep lines into his face. "I appreciate you meeting me," Beckett said, his voice low. Langston nodded stiffly. "When a four-star general requests a meeting, you show up. Even retired ones." "This isn't about rank," Beckett slid a folder across the table. "It's about truth." Langston reviewed the evidence silently, his expression darkening as he read about Troy Hanley's involvement in his son's death. When he finished, he closed the folder with a shaking hand. "You're telling me my son was murdered by his fellow cadet, and they pinned it on this girl?" His voice was hollow with disbelief. "Yes," Beckett said simply, "and she's my daughter." A tense silence stretched between them. "Jacob was seeing someone," Langston finally said, the words seeming to pain him. "Secretly. Someone he loved very much." He looked up at Beckett. "He was afraid to tell me. Afraid I wouldn't understand." "Was it Zaria?" Beckett asked quietly. Langston nodded slowly. "I found letters, never read them fully, but I saw her name. Jacob wrote that she was brilliant, kind, that she challenged him to be better." His eyes filled with tears. "I should have told the investigators." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Pentagon windows in shades of amber and gold. Colonel Harper knocked on Beckett's office door, his face tight with urgency. "Sir, you need to hear this," Harper said, placing a digital recorder on the desk. Beckett pressed play, and Jacob Langston's voice filled the room, young, earnest, and troubled. "Troy, I'm done hiding. It's not about you, man. Zaria deserves better than our secrets. I'm telling everyone tomorrow. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I won't let academy politics keep us apart anymore." The recording ended with a soft click. Beckett sat back, the pieces finally connecting. "Troy killed Jacob because he was going public about his relationship with Zaria," Harper said, his voice low. "And he knew the racial backlash would make her an easy scapegoat." Beckett's jaw tightened. "This is the motive we needed. When was this recorded?" "The night before Jacob's murder, the prosecutor's office had it all along but marked it irrelevant to the case." Harper's disgust was evident. "Sir, this isn't just injustice, it's corruption." The prison visiting room was cold and sterile. Beckett sat rigidly, his uniform a stark contrast to the drab surroundings. When the door opened and Zaria entered, his breath caught. She had Monica's eyes, intelligent, fierce, questioning. She sat across from him, the glass barrier between them like years of absence made physical. Neither spoke for a long moment. "I didn't think you'd come," Zaria finally said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I should have come sooner," Beckett replied, His usual commanding tone replaced with something softer, more vulnerable. "Why now?" she asked. "Because you're innocent and because you're my daughter?" Zaria's eyes flashed. "I didn't need you to save me, I needed you to believe me." The words hit Beckett like physical blows. He'd spent a lifetime making strategic decisions, but nothing had prepared him for the raw honesty of his daughter's pain. "I do now," he said, his voice breaking. "I believe you, Zaria, and I failed you before you were even born." A tear slipped down Zaria's cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "Mom said you chose duty over us." "I did," Beckett admitted. "It was the worst mistake of my life." They sat in silence, 20 years of absence hanging between them. At the Pentagon, General Rawlings paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "Contain this, damn it. Beckett's gone rogue with these accusations." But containment was becoming impossible. An email had been leaked to 3 major news outlets, a correspondence from 5 years earlier where Rawlings had personally directed Academy officials to handle internally several misconduct reports. "Sir," his aide interrupted, "there's more. A former cadet is speaking publicly about being assaulted by Troy Hanley 3 years ago. She says her complaint was buried after she was threatened with expulsion." Rawlings slammed his fist on the desk. "Who leaked these files?" The aide swallowed hard. "We don't know, sir. But they came from the sealed section of the Academy records, the ones only you and 3 others had access to." The general's face paled as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. The carefully constructed system of protection and privilege was unraveling thread by thread. The courtroom of public opinion shifted dramatically when Noah Dre's lawyer called an unexpected press conference. The small, cluttered law office was packed with reporters as the attorney placed a USB drive into a laptop and turned the screen toward the cameras. Noah appeared on screen, his hands fidgeting nervously with a pencil. Unlike in court settings where he'd been overwhelmed into silence, here in the controlled environment of his home, his words flowed with clarity and purpose. "I was there that night," Noah said, his voice soft but steady. "I was studying the stars from the roof access. I saw Troy Hanley follow Jacob across the back lot. They were arguing. Troy pushed Jacob. Then there was a knife." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The girl, Zaria, she came after. Way after. She was trying to help him." Noah's lawyer then distributed copies of Noah's handwritten testimony, complete with timestamps and a diagram of where everyone had stood. The statement included details only someone who witnessed the event could know. The color of Jacob's scarf, the way Troy had wiped the knife on his uniform pants, the exact words Zaria had spoken when she found Jacob. "My client has autism spectrum disorder and processes information differently," the lawyer explained. "But his memory is precise, and his commitment to truth is absolute. He was too frightened to come forward initially, but he can no longer stay silent knowing an innocent person might die." In Washington, the Attorney General's office was in chaos. Phones rang continuously as public pressure mounted. News channels split their screens between Noah's testimony and footage of protests outside the prison where Zaria awaited execution. By evening, the Attorney General emerged from an emergency meeting, looking haggard but resolute. "In light of substantial new evidence, my office is issuing a federal injunction delaying the execution of Zaria Wells for 10 days pending an emergency hearing," she announced to the cameras. In his Pentagon office, General Beckett watched the announcement on television, clutching the official notice in his hand. His aide stood silently by the door, waiting for orders. "We're not done yet," Beckett whispered, his eyes never leaving the screen. "This buys us time, but they'll fight back. The system doesn't admit mistakes easily." He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his pocket, next to the photo of Monica he'd carried for 20 years. Troy Hanley sat in a sterile room within the military detention center, his uniform replaced by prison orange. Across from him, Dr. Elaine Foster, the prison psychologist, watched him carefully. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Troy said suddenly, breaking 40 minutes of defensive silence. Dr. Foster kept her expression neutral. "What didn't you mean to happen, Troy?" "I never meant to kill him," Troy whispered, his facade finally cracking. I just wanted to scare him, to make him back off. He was going to tell everyone about him and that girl. "Zaria Wells?" Dr. Foster prompted. Troy's face twisted with resentment. Jacob was throwing away everything for her. His future, his reputation, mine too. We had a pact to protect each other, and he was breaking it. So what happened that night? I just wanted to threaten him, make him see reason. Troy's voice broke, but he laughed at me, said I was pathetic. The knife was just supposed to scare him, but he moved wrong, and then there was so much blood. What Troy didn't know was that this session, like all psychological evaluations of high-profile detainees, was being recorded under authorized surveillance protocols. His confession, captured word for word, would soon become the final piece of evidence in Zaria's fight for justice. The metal doors of death row slid open with a heavy clank. Zaria stepped out, her few belongings clutched in a small paper bag. The guard beside her kept a respectful distance as they moved through the corridor toward the holding wing. "Wells, you're headed to Block C until your appeal," the guard said, her voice softer than usual. As they walked, inmates pressed against their cell doors. Word had spread fast about Noah's testimony and Troy's confession. One by one, they began to clap and call out, "Stay strong, girl. You got this, Zaria. Truth always comes out." Zaria kept her eyes forward, afraid to hope too much. When they reached the end of the corridor, Dana stood waiting by her cell door. "Told you the storm might break," Dana said with a small smile. Zaria set down her bag and embraced her friend tightly. "I wouldn't have made it without you." Dana pulled back, her eyes glistening. "You'll be free. Write about this. Make it count." She pressed something into Zaria's palm, a small handmade bookmark with pressed flowers. "So you remember to start your story from here, not from before." Zaria clutched it to her chest as the guard led her away. The congressional hearing room buzzed with tension. General Alexander Beckett stood at attention before the ethics panel, his uniform pristine but his face lined with fatigue. "General Beckett, you understand the gravity of your actions?" Congresswoman Chen asked, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I do, Madam Chairwoman," Beckett replied, his voice steady. "Then please explain to this committee why you chose to publicly undermine a criminal conviction and reveal classified information about Academy protocols." Beckett looked directly at the panel. "Because I chose wrong for 20 years and I couldn't choose wrong again." The room fell silent. "I remained silent when Monica Wells told me she was pregnant. I remained silent when my daughter was born. I remained silent when Troy Hanley's earlier misconduct was buried to protect Academy reputation." His voice grew stronger. "I have chosen optics over lives, appearance over truth for my entire career." He placed his service record on the table before them. "I accept whatever consequences this board deems appropriate, but I will not accept my daughter dying for a crime she didn't commit while I stand by in silence one more time." The silence in the room was deafening. Not a pen scratched, not a chair creaked. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon sun. Beckett knelt before Monica's simple headstone, tracing her name with his fingertips. "I should have come sooner," he whispered. "I should have done so many things sooner." He unpinned the small stars and stripes emblem from his uniform, the symbol of his rank and achievement, and placed it gently beside a small bouquet of wildflowers someone had left. "She has your eyes," he said softly, "and your courage. Far more of you than me and her, thank God." Beckett stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. "I finally did something right." The courthouse loomed ahead as he walked from the cemetery, his shoulders straight despite the weight he carried. Inside waited the final appeal hearing, his last chance to save the daughter he'd only just begun to know. The conference room in the courthouse bustled with activity. Alexander Beckett sat at the long oak table, his posture military straight despite the weight of exhaustion. Across from him, Zaria's legal team, a public defender named Sarah Chen and 2 volunteer attorneys from the Innocence Project, spread documents across the polished surface. "The judge has agreed to the resentencing hearing tomorrow morning," Sarah explained, her voice steady but cautious. "Justice Monroe isn't known for changing her mind, but the evidence is compelling." Colonel Harper nodded, sliding a thick folder toward the center of the table. "We've organized everything chronologically. The suppressed voicemail from Jacob, Noah Dre's testimony, and Troy's confession to the prison psychologist." Beckett's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. State Attorney's Office is pushing back, hard. "Charles Duvall," Sarah sighed. "He's calling it politically motivated. Says the timing is suspicious and claims we're manipulating public sentiment." "Of course he is," Beckett replied. "He built his career on high-profile convictions. Admitting he got this one wrong would destroy his reputation." "And save my daughter's life," he added quietly. The room fell silent for a moment before Sarah spoke again. "General, you should know. Justice Monroe has a reputation. She believes in the system, sometimes blindly. She's denied more appeals than any other judge in the district." Beckett met her eyes. "Then we make sure the system works this time." In a small preparation room at the courthouse, Zaria stood before a full-length mirror. The navy blue suit hung loosely on her frame. Prison food and stress had taken their toll. A court-appointed assistant helped adjust the jacket. "It's the best we could find on short notice," the woman apologized. Zaria barely heard her. She was transfixed by her own reflection. After months in orange jumpsuits, the person staring back seemed like a stranger, someone from another life. She reached up to touch her face. Her cheekbones were sharper now, her eyes deeper, but they were still her mother's eyes. "Mama, I'm going to walk out of here," she whispered, so quietly the assistant didn't hear. Zaria straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. Whatever happened today, she would face it with dignity, the way her mother had faced everything. The courtroom fell silent as Justice Elaine Monroe entered. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her black robes crisp and imposing. She surveyed the packed gallery with narrowed eyes before taking her seat. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying authority that commanded immediate attention. "We are here to consider new evidence in the case of the state versus Zaria Wells." Her gaze settled on Zaria. "I want to make something very clear. This court is not swayed by media attention or political pressure. We deal in facts and law only." State Attorney Charles Duvall nodded approvingly from his table. He was a tall man with a politician's smile that never reached his eyes. "The defense may call its first witness," Justice Monroe said. Colonel Harper approached the stand, his uniform impeccable, his expression grave. After being sworn in, he met the judge's skeptical gaze directly. "Colonel Harper, please explain your involvement in this case," Sarah began. "I was assigned by General Beckett to investigate inconsistencies in the original investigation," Harper replied. "What I found was a pattern of deliberate evidence suppression going back years." He methodically detailed the buried reports of Troy Hanley's previous misconduct, the edited witness lists, and the Academy's internal policy of protecting certain cadets from scrutiny. "And who authorized these suppressions?" Sarah asked. "Various officials over time, but the policy was formalized under General Rawlings with tacit approval from the Pentagon leadership," Harper answered. Justice Monroe leaned forward. "Are you suggesting a conspiracy, Colonel?" "No, Your Honor. I'm stating facts. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was standard procedure. That's what makes it worse." The morning sun crept over the prison walls, casting long shadows across the yard. Inmates gathered in small clusters, their voices low and urgent. Word had spread about Zaria's hearing, and even hardened criminals felt the weight of what was happening. Justice, so rare in these walls, might actually prevail today. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. Reporters scribbled notes, while activists and curious citizens strained to see. At the front, Noah Dre sat with his parents, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The young cadet's eyes darted nervously around the room, but his posture remained straight. When the bailiff called his name, Noah walked to the witness stand with measured steps. After being sworn in, he sat down, adjusting his academy uniform. "Mr. Dre," Sarah Chen began gently, "can you tell the court what you saw on the night Jacob Langston died?" Noah took a deep breath. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly through the silent courtroom. I was studying by the east window of the library. I always sit there because the lighting is consistent and there are fewer distractions. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I saw Troy Hanley following Jacob. They were arguing. Troy kept grabbing at Jacob's arm, but Jacob pulled away. Noah's testimony continued with remarkable precision. He recalled exact times, descriptions of clothing, even the direction the wind was blowing. Most importantly, he described seeing Troy push Jacob against the wall, then a flash of something silver in Troy's hand. "And did you see Zaria Wells at this point?" Sarah asked. She came later. After Troy ran, she found Jacob on the ground. The courtroom remained utterly still as Noah spoke. His unembellished account carried the unmistakable ring of truth. When State Attorney Duvall rose for cross-examination, his approach was immediately aggressive. "Mr. Dre, your condition makes it difficult for you to interpret social cues, doesn't it?" he asked, his tone condescending. "I'm autistic," Noah replied simply. "I see things differently, but often more clearly." "But surely you could have misinterpreted what you saw," Duvall pressed. "Perhaps what you thought was a weapon was just a reflection? Perhaps—" "Objection!" Sarah called out, but before the judge could respond, a deep voice boomed from the gallery. "That's enough!" General Beckett stood, his face flushed with anger. "This young man has shown more courage and clarity than your entire department, Mr. Duvall." "General Beckett," Justice Monroe warned, "you will refrain from outbursts or be removed." "Your Honor," Beckett continued, his voice slightly lower but no less intense, "Noah Dre's testimony is precise because of how he processes information, not despite it. He has no reason to lie, no agenda to push. He's risking his future at the Academy by being here." The courtroom fell silent. Justice Monroe's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. She nodded once at Beckett before he sat down. "Continue, Mr. Duvall, but tread carefully," she cautioned. The afternoon brought another bombshell. General Rawlings, subpoenaed by the defense, took the stand with visible reluctance. Under oath and faced with documented evidence, he finally cracked. "Yes," he admitted. "I personally ordered Troy Hanley's disciplinary records sealed and removed from the Academy database." "And why would you do that?" Sarah asked. Rawlings shifted uncomfortably. "His father is a major donor to the Academy, and there was concern about public perception of the institution." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Justice Monroe banged her gavel repeatedly. Order in this court," she demanded. When silence finally returned, she set down her gavel with a sigh. "This court will recess until tomorrow morning. I need to review all submitted documents in light of today's testimony." The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls, waiting. Justice Monroe entered, her face unreadable as she took her place at the bench. "Before I make my ruling, the court will hear one final witness," she announced. A young man in civilian clothes was escorted in. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in. "Please state your name for the record," Sarah Chen requested. "Marcus Delgado, I was Troy Hanley's roommate at the Academy." A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "The night Jacob died, Troy came back to our room around midnight. He was drunk and his hands were shaking. There was blood on his sleeve that he tried to wash off." Marcus paused, his voice dropping. "He kept saying he deserved it. He chose her over me." "Did Troy specifically mention what happened?" Sarah asked. Marcus nodded. "He said Jacob was going to tell everyone about him and Zaria, that Jacob was in love with her. Troy couldn't stand it. He said he just wanted to scare Jacob, but things got out of hand." State Attorney Duvall tried desperately to discredit Marcus, suggesting he was lying to protect Zaria, but the young man's testimony held firm. The timeline matched Noah's account perfectly. After a brief recess, Justice Monroe returned to deliver her ruling. The courtroom fell silent. In light of substantial new evidence, including eyewitness testimony and the revelation of deliberately suppressed information, this court finds that Zaria Wells's conviction was based on incomplete and potentially manipulated evidence. She looked directly at Zaria. "The conviction is hereby overturned." Gasps and cries filled the room. Lisa Wells broke into tears, clutching the hand of the woman next to her. However, Justice Monroe continued, the state reserves the right to retry this case. Ms. Wells will be released immediately pending any further legal proceedings. The court erupted in cheers. Justice Monroe banged her gavel, calling for order, but her own eyes shone with emotion. Court is adjourned. Within hours, the prison received the release order. Zaria changed into civilian clothes provided by her aunt, simple jeans and a blue sweater that hung loose on her thinner frame. Outside the courtroom, media crews swarmed the hallway. General Beckett stood alone against the wall, his military posture intact, but his shoulders visibly heavy with emotion. When the doors opened and Zaria emerged flanked by court-martials, cameras flashed frantically. Zaria stopped when she saw him. For a long moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other across the crowded hallway. Years of absence, months of fear, and days of desperate hope passed between them in that silent gaze. She walked toward him slowly. The marshals, understanding the moment, stepped back respectfully. "Thank you," Zaria said quietly, "for showing up." Beckett's eyes filled with tears. He didn't reach for her. He knew he hadn't earned that right yet. But he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there all along," he whispered. As Zaria stepped through the courthouse doors, a memory washed over her. She was 7 years old, crying after some kids had teased her at school. Her mother, Monica, had knelt down, wiping her tears away with gentle fingers. "Baby girl," Monica had whispered, holding Zaria's small face between her hands. "No matter what happens, you're strong enough to stand. Your roots go deeper than they know." The memory warmed Zaria's heart as she blinked against the bright sunlight. Camera flashes exploded around her like lightning. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, their voices blending into a wall of noise. But Zaria felt her mother's strength flowing through her veins. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin just as Monica had taught her. The crowd's roar faded to a distant hum as she walked forward with quiet dignity. Not running, not hiding, standing tall. Lisa appeared at her side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. Together they moved through the crowd toward the car waiting at the curb. Later that afternoon, the Pentagon press room buzzed with speculation. Reporters checked their watches and whispered theories about the hastily called conference. When General Alexander Beckett walked in, the room fell silent. He stood at the podium, his medals gleaming under the harsh lights. For a moment, he simply looked out at the sea of faces. "For 42 years," he began, his voice steady, "I've worn this uniform with pride. Today, I stand before you to announce my immediate resignation as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked frantically. "Recent events have shown me that my duty to truth is greater than my duty to position. This uniform gave me power, but the truth gave me purpose." His eyes, usually hard and unreadable, shone with emotion. "I failed my daughter before she was born. I will not fail her now by clinging to a position I've compromised." Some reporters burst into applause. Others sat stunned, frantically typing on their phones. Beckett raised his hand for silence. "I take full responsibility for my part in a system that values appearances over justice. My resignation is effective immediately." The following morning, Troy Hanley was escorted from a police cruiser into the courthouse. His wrists were cuffed in front of him, his academy uniform replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Zaria stood on the courthouse steps with Lisa and Beckett, watching as Troy was led up the stairs. The formal charges of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice had been announced just hours earlier. As the officers guided him past, Troy's eyes locked with Zaria's. His gaze held anger, fear, and something else, a desperate plea for the sympathy he'd never shown her. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stared at each other. Zaria didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply stood, her mother's words echoing in her heart. Troy was the first to break eye contact, his head dropping as the officers led him inside. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, Zaria let out a long breath. The nightmare that had consumed her life was finally ending. 2 months after her release, Zaria stood before her mother's grave. The cemetery was peaceful, with autumn leaves drifting across the well-kept grounds. She knelt and traced Monica's name on the simple headstone, her fingers lingering on each letter. "Hi, Mama," she whispered, her voice catching. "I made it out." From her bag, Zaria pulled the letter she'd written on death row, pages filled with her hopes, fears, and final goodbyes that now would never be needed. She'd folded it carefully inside a handmade envelope decorated with pressed flowers from the prison yard. "You never stopped protecting me," Zaria said, placing the letter beneath a small stone. "Even when you were gone, you left me that number. You made sure I had a way out." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. "You knew he'd come through, didn't you?" The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away her words. Zaria sat in silence, feeling closer to her mother than she had in years. The grand ballroom of the Washington Convention Center hummed with anticipation. Hundreds of attorneys, activists, and students filled the seats at the Youth Justice Summit. General Alexander Beckett, now simply Mr. Beckett, approached the podium with a different kind of confidence than he'd shown at military briefings. "Justice isn't just a concept," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "It's the difference between life and death for young people like my daughter." The crowd leaned forward, captivated by his transformation from military leader to advocate. "Today I'm announcing the establishment of the Monica Wells Foundation for Truth and Reform," Beckett continued, revealing a logo that combined scales of justice with an open book. Named for a woman who fought for justice her entire life, this foundation will provide legal aid and policy advocacy for wrongfully convicted youth. Applause erupted as Beckett outlined the foundation's 3-part mission: legal representation for the innocent, policy reform to prevent future injustices, and education programs to build a new generation of justice advocates. "My daughter almost died because of systemic failures I helped maintain," Beckett said, his voice steady but emotional. "This foundation is not about erasing that guilt. It's about channeling it towards something that matters." The brick buildings of Howard University stood proud against the blue September sky. Lisa Wells helped Zaria carry her belongings into the freshman dormitory, both women barely containing their excitement. "Your mother would be so proud," Lisa said, arranging Zaria's books on the small desk. "She always dreamed you'd come here someday." Zaria smoothed her hand over the university sweatshirt she'd received at orientation that morning. "I still can't believe I'm really here." Later that afternoon, Zaria attended her pre-law orientation. Professor Carter, a distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair, addressed the small group of students. "Each of you brings your own story to this journey," she said, making eye contact with each student. When she reached Zaria, she paused. "Some of you have already witnessed the justice system's deepest flaws firsthand." After the session, Professor Carter approached Zaria with a thick law textbook. "Ms. Wells," she said warmly, "I believe this belongs to you now." Zaria took the book, running her fingers over its leather binding. The weight of it felt right in her hands, substantial, important. Her eyes shone with renewed purpose as she clutched it close to her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and clear. The midnight stillness wrapped around Howard University like a gentle blanket. Most students had long since fallen asleep, but Zaria Wells sat cross-legged on her bed, gazing out the window at the moonlit campus. The peaceful quiet felt almost unreal after months of prison's constant noise and fear. She ran her fingers along the edge of a brand-new leather-bound notebook, a gift from Lisa on her first day of college. Taking a deep breath, Zaria opened to the first blank page and uncapped her pen. For a moment, she hesitated, then began to write in her neat, careful handwriting. "This is the story of how I almost died, and the man who saved me by finally being my father." The words flowed more easily after that. Memories poured onto the page, some painful, some healing. Zaria wrote until her hand cramped, occasionally glancing up at the peaceful campus that represented everything she'd almost lost. This wasn't just therapy, it was testimony. Her story deserved to be told. Alexander Beckett stood in the center of his Pentagon office, now stripped of personal items. The The space that had defined him for decades looked strangely impersonal, just another room waiting for its next occupant. He ran his hand along the polished desk where he'd made decisions affecting thousands of lives. The weight of that power had once felt necessary. Now it felt like a burden he was finally setting down. From his briefcase, Beckett pulled out a framed photograph he'd never displayed here. It showed Monica Wells holding baby Zaria, both smiling in the golden light of a West African sunset. Lisa had given it to him after the trial, reluctantly at first, then with understanding. "You should have this," she'd said. "It's time you knew what you missed." Beckett placed the photo in his briefcase with care, snapped it shut, and took one final look around. Without ceremony, he reached for the light switch and turned it off, closing the door on his military career. The weekend cafe buzzed with quiet conversation. Zaria arrived first, choosing a corner table away from the windows. When Beckett entered, he spotted her immediately, her posture straight but relaxed, so like Monica's. "I ordered you black coffee," Zaria said as he sat down. "Lisa mentioned that's how you take it." "Thank you," he replied, surprised by the thoughtfulness. For the first time, they talked without the shadow of death or courtrooms hanging over them. Zaria described her literature professor's passionate lectures on James Baldwin. Beckett recommended history books that had shaped his worldview. "Mom loved reading," Zaria said, stirring her tea. "She'd stay up all night with a good book." Beckett smiled. "She once read an entire medical journal on our flight to Senegal, said she couldn't waste the time just sleeping." When Zaria mentioned her journalism elective, her eyes lit up with excitement about an upcoming assignment. The story made her laugh, a bright, melodic sound that transformed her face. Beckett paused mid-sentence, a look of wonder crossing his features. "What?" Zaria asked. "You laugh just like your mother," he said softly. The moment hung between them, not painful, but precious. A connection neither had expected to find. The lecture hall at Howard University buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and students lined the walls to hear the special panel on criminal justice reform. At the center of the stage sat Zaria Wells, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the butterflies in her stomach. When the moderator introduced her, a hush fell over the crowd. Zaria approached the microphone with measured steps, her notes tucked into her pocket, unneeded. She knew exactly what she needed to say. "6 months ago I was preparing to die," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Not because I was guilty, but because I was invisible." For 20 minutes she shared her story without self-pity or anger, just truth. She described the feeling of being erased by a system that never saw her as a person. When she reached her conclusion, her voice grew stronger. "I was never asking to be rescued," Zaria said, meeting the eyes of students across the room. "I was asking to be heard, and that's what I'm asking for every person caught in a system that swallows voices whole." The silence that followed lasted only seconds before the first person stood. Then another. Within moments, the entire room was on their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Several professors wiped tears from their eyes. A news camera in the back captured it all, her words already traveling beyond these walls. In the third row, Lisa Wells stood with her hands pressed to her heart, tears streaming freely down her face. She had never looked prouder. After the panel ended and the crowd thinned, Lisa made her way to the stage where Zaria was gathering her things. When their eyes met, both women moved quickly into an embrace that said everything words couldn't. "You never gave up on me," Zaria whispered against her aunt's shoulder. "You were my family when no one else was." Lisa pulled back just enough to cup Zaria's face in her hands. "I always knew who you were, even when the world tried to tell you differently." They held each other a moment longer, both understanding that something had healed between them, a wound neither had fully acknowledged until now. Across town that same evening, Alexander Beckett sat at the head of a polished conference table. Around him were 7 retired generals and 3 former cabinet members, people whose calls he would have once answered immediately, regardless of the hour. "The Monica Wells Foundation isn't just about clearing innocent names," Beckett explained, sliding folders across the table. It's about preventing those names from being tarnished in the first place. He outlined the prison reform bill with the precision of a military operation, addressing sentencing guidelines, evidence protocols, and protection for vulnerable defendants. Some nodded along, others frowned. This could be seen as criticizing the very system we've upheld, General Thompson said, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. Perhaps that system needs criticism, Beckett replied evenly. I've seen it fail my daughter. How many others has it failed without anyone noticing? By meeting's end, 5 had committed their public support. 2 more promised to review the proposal in detail. It wasn't universal approval, but it was a start. Exactly what Beckett had hoped for. As they filed out, his former commanding officer paused by the door. Monica would be proud, he said quietly, of both of you. The yellow school bus rumbled to a stop outside Jefferson High, the same school Zaria had attended before her life changed forever. She smoothed her blazer and took a deep breath before walking through the metal detectors, this time as an invited guest speaker, not a student. The auditorium was packed with teenagers, their faces a mix of boredom, curiosity, and that unmistakable teenage skepticism. Principal Rivera introduced her with glowing words that still felt strange to Zaria's ears. Fame had never been her goal. Most of you know my story from the news, Zaria began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But headlines don't tell you who I really am. As she spoke, she noticed a group of girls in the third row, dark-skinned, bright-eyed, and watching her with such intensity it almost hurt. They reminded her so much of herself at 16 that her voice caught momentarily. I grew up 3 blocks from here, she continued. Same classrooms, same struggles, same dreams. But I'm here to tell you something important. She paused, making eye contact with the girls who seemed to be holding their breath. Your story is not where you're from. It's what you choose to become. The auditorium fell silent. Even the students who had been checking their phones looked up. They tried to write my ending for me, they almost did, but here I am writing my own chapters now. She smiled. And so can you. After her speech, those same girls approached her, one clutching a notebook covered in social justice stickers. I want to be a lawyer too, the girl said quietly. But everyone says people from our neighborhood don't make it that far. Zaria gently took the notebook, borrowed a pen, and wrote inside. They're wrong. Start proving it today. The prison visiting room hadn't changed. Same uncomfortable plastic chairs, same fluorescent lights that made everyone look ill. But this time, Alexander Beckett sat on the visitor's side, his military posture softened only slightly by civilian clothes. Dana entered with surprise written across her face. She recognized him immediately from the news coverage. You're Zaria's father, she said as she sat down. Beckett nodded. And you're the friend who gave her hope when I couldn't. Dana's eyes narrowed slightly. I didn't do it for credit. Which is precisely why you deserve it. He slid a thick folder across the table. The Monica Wells Foundation has been reviewing cases similar to Zaria's. Yours caught our attention. Dana stared at the folder without touching it. These are legal documents prepared by our team, Beckett explained. We believe there are grounds to reopen your case based on improper evidence handling and witness testimony inconsistencies. Dana's hands trembled as she finally reached for the folder. Someone believed in my daughter, Beckett said quietly. Now it's time we believe in you. Dana opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page before looking up with the first genuine hope she'd felt in years. The marble steps of the D.C. courthouse gleamed in the morning sun as Zaria climbed them, briefcase in hand. She paused momentarily, remembering the last time she'd entered this building, in handcuffs, terrified and alone. Today she wore a tailored navy suit, her intern badge for the district attorney's wrongful conviction unit displayed proudly on her lapel. Inside, legal program director Marianne Chen waited with a case file. Ready for your first case, Ms. Wells? She asked, handing over the thick folder. Zaria nodded, opening it to see the face of a 17-year-old boy staring back at her from his mugshot. According to the file, he'd been charged with armed robbery despite shaky eyewitness testimony and no physical evidence. His name is Marcus Johnson, Marianne explained. The case against him is thin, but his public defender had 20 other cases and barely spent an hour on his defense. Zaria felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest. I'll start by interviewing him today. As they walked toward the conference room, Marianne smiled. You know, most interns are intimidated by their first case. Zaria squared her shoulders. I've seen the system from the inside. Now I'm going to change it from the inside too. The morning sun cast a warm glow through the windows of Monica's table, a small community center nestled in the heart of the city. Volunteers bustled about, setting up breakfast stations while families began to trickle in. The center's mission was simple but powerful, providing support to those affected by incarceration. Zaria moved with purpose, greeting families she recognized from previous weeks. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple t-shirt with the center's logo, a table surrounded by silhouettes of people holding hands. Across the room, General Alexander Beckett, now just Alexander to everyone here, looked almost out of place in his casual button-down shirt and jeans. His military bearing remained, but there was a softness to him now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. A small girl with beaded braids approached Zaria with a math worksheet clutched in her tiny hands. "Miss Zaria, can you help me with fractions again?" the child asked, her voice small but determined. "Of course, Kiana," Zaria smiled, pulling out a chair. "Let's see what we're working with today." As Zaria patiently explained equivalent fractions using paper plates as visual aids, Beckett stood by the coffee station, watching. His eyes never left his daughter, the way she leaned in when Kiana spoke, how she celebrated each correct answer with a high five, the gentle patience in her voice when explaining concepts again. Something tightened in his chest. This was Monica's kindness living on in their daughter. He had missed so much. During the lunch break, when the center quieted down, Beckett gathered his courage. He approached Zaria with a weathered envelope under his arm. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. They sat across from each other at a small table in the corner. Beckett placed the envelope between them. "Your mother sent this to me when you were about 2 years old," he explained, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I never opened it. I was afraid, I suppose." "And now?" Zaria asked, her eyes steady on his face. "Now I'm more afraid of not knowing," he admitted. Together they opened the envelope. Inside was a small photo album, its cover faded blue with tiny yellow stars. As they turned the pages, Monica's life with baby Zaria unfolded before them. Zaria's first smile, first steps, first birthday cake with one candle. Monica's handwriting labeled each moment. "She looked so happy," Beckett whispered, tracing Monica's smiling face in a photo where she held Zaria up to see snow for the first time. "She was," Zaria confirmed, her fingers lingering on a picture of herself in Monica's arms. "Aunt Lisa always said Mom found joy in everything." As the day wound down and they helped clean up the center, Beckett walked Zaria to her car. "Would it be okay if we did this again next Saturday?" he asked, uncertainty making him look years younger. Zaria grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Only if you let me teach you how to cook something that's not out of a can." Beckett laughed, a real laugh that reached his eyes. "It's a deal." The evening sky painted soft purples and oranges across the horizon, as Zaria walked the familiar streets of her childhood neighborhood. These same sidewalks that once felt like a gauntlet of judgment and whispers now carried a different energy. She paused at the corner store where Mr. Jenkins used to eye her suspiciously. Today, he waved warmly through the window. A group of young girls playing double dutch on the sidewalk stopped their game as she passed. One nudged another, pointing discreetly. "That's her, that's Zaria Wells," the tallest girl whispered, admiration clear in her voice. Zaria smiled and gave them a small wave. The girls giggled and waved back enthusiastically. It felt strange, this newfound respect where once there had been only suspicion. The community that had once been quick to believe the worst about her now looked at her with pride. Mrs. Carter, who used to hurry her children inside when Zaria walked by, now stood on her porch and called out, "We're all so proud of you, honey." Zaria thanked her with a nod, emotion catching in her throat. The journey from accused murderer to symbol of justice had been long and painful, but moments like these reminded her it had all been worth it. When she reached her aunt's apartment building, she took the stairs slowly, savoring the feeling of coming home. Lisa opened the door before Zaria could knock. "I saw you coming up the street," she explained, pulling her niece into a tight hug. Inside, Zaria stopped in her tracks. The living room wall, once sparsely decorated with a few family photos, had been transformed. Lisa had created an elaborate memory wall, photos of Monica smiling in her nurse's uniform, newspaper clippings about Zaria's case and release, and at the center, a professionally framed copy of Beckett's resignation speech. "Aunt Lisa," Zaria whispered, stepping closer to examine the display. "When did you do all this?" "Been working on it for weeks," Lisa said proudly. "Our story deserves to be remembered." Zaria's fingers traced the edge of her mother's photo. Monica's smile radiated warmth even from the faded picture. Crossing to the bookshelf, Zaria pulled out her latest journal, a leather-bound book Beckett had given her. She placed it carefully on the shelf beside her other journals, each one documenting a chapter of her journey. The final line she'd written earlier that day stared back at her. "Justice didn't save me, truth did, and truth needs warriors." Zaria looked up at her mother's portrait, the familiar eyes that seemed to follow her even now. "We made it, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "We really made it." Alexander Beckett straightened his tie as he entered the congressional hearing room. Though he no longer wore his military uniform, he carried himself with the same discipline and purpose. The room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed and reporters whispered as he made his way to the witness table. The Wells Act had been months in the making. Named after Zaria, it would ban executions for anyone under 21 and create strict transparency requirements for prosecutors. Beckett had helped draft it alongside criminal justice reform advocates, pouring countless hours into its language. "General Beckett, we welcome your testimony," Congresswoman Harris said, gesturing to the microphone. Beckett leaned forward. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I come before you not as a military leader, but as a father who nearly lost his daughter to a broken system." Across town at Howard University, Zaria sat in the student lounge surrounded by classmates. Her eyes remained fixed on the television screen showing the hearing. Her heart pounded as she watched her father speak with conviction and clarity. "That's your dad?" a fellow student whispered in awe. Zaria nodded, unable to speak as emotion tightened her throat. Back at the hearing, Beckett methodically laid out the flaws in the justice system that had nearly cost Zaria her life. Rushed investigations, suppressed evidence, racial bias, and a system more concerned with convictions than truth. "The Wells Act isn't about being soft on crime," he explained. "It's about ensuring we never execute an innocent person." Questions came from both sides of the aisle, some skeptical, others supportive. Through it all, Beckett remained steady, answering with the precision that had once made him a formidable military strategist. As the hearing drew to a close, Congresswoman Harris asked for his final statement. Beckett paused, looking directly into the camera. "Being a father doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up when it matters. I failed once. I won't fail again." His voice cracked slightly. "This bill gives others the second chance my daughter and I received." The committee room fell silent before erupting in applause. Even the most conservative members nodded in respect. Minutes later, the committee voted unanimously to advance the Wells Act to the full House. In the hallway afterward, surrounded by congratulatory handshakes, Beckett felt his phone vibrate. He excused himself and answered. "Hello? I'm proud of you, Dad." Zaria's voice was clear and strong. Beckett smiled, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The word, Dad, still felt new, precious. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means everything." The soft golden light of dawn stretched across Washington, D.C., painting the city in hues of amber and rose. Zaria Wells sat alone by the edge of the reflecting pool, her knees pulled up to her chest. The water lay still before her, a perfect mirror for the awakening sky. She wore a simple white sweater against the morning chill, her dark curls framing her face as she gazed out at the peaceful scene. Alexander Beckett approached quietly, his footsteps gentle on the path. He had traded his military uniform for a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Spotting Zarya, he slowed his pace, taking in the sight of his daughter in this moment of solitude. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. Zarya looked up and nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I was hoping you'd come." Beckett lowered himself beside her, his movements careful and deliberate. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun's rays stretch across the water. Neither felt the need to fill the quiet with words. It was a peace they had earned through months of healing, of learning to be father and daughter after decades apart. The Washington Monument stood tall in the distance, its reflection rippling gently in the pool. Birds called to one another, welcoming the new day. After several minutes, Zarya reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a carefully folded paper boat crafted from crisp white paper. With gentle fingers, she smoothed its edges. "I made this last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Beckett watched as she turned the boat to show him the words written in her neat handwriting across its sail. Monica Wells. Truth, freedom, forgiveness. His breath caught in his throat. Monica's name, written in their daughter's hand, brought a rush of memories. Monica's laugh, her determination, her unwavering belief in justice. "It's beautiful," he said simply, the words inadequate for what he felt. Zarya nodded, then leaned forward. With careful movements, she placed the paper boat onto the surface of the reflecting pool. It bobbed gently before finding its balance, then began to drift slowly away from the edge, carrying its precious cargo of words. "For Mom," she said, "and for us." The tiny vessel moved steadily across the water, growing smaller as it journeyed toward the center of the pool. Both watched in reverent silence as it carried away symbols of their shared pain and healing. Beckett hesitated, then reached out and took Zarya's hand in his. Her fingers were warm and strong as they curled around his. It was a simple gesture, yet filled with meaning, a connection that had once seemed impossible. The sun continued its ascent, casting long beams across the water. The city was waking up around them, but in this moment, they existed in a peaceful bubble of their own making. Zarya turned to look at her father, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think she'd be proud of us," she said. Beckett met his daughter's gaze, seeing so much of Monica there, the same determination, the same capacity for forgiveness, the same unwavering strength. "I know she would," he replied, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. They turned back to watch the little boat as it continued its journey across the water, growing smaller in the distance. Two people once torn apart by silence, now sitting side by side, healed by truth. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer stood between them like an uncrossable chasm. In the gentle light of morning, father and daughter sat together in peace, honoring the woman who had connected them and the difficult path that had finally brought them to each other. If you enjoyed the story of Alexander and Zarya, I handpicked this next story. If you enjoyed the story of Alexander and Zarya, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.